Hello my friends, I hope you're having a wonderful day today, and welcome back to another episode of r/ProRevenge, where you come to get your daily dose of satisfaction by listening to stories of others getting their just desserts. Guys, this episode is a wild one. There's 3 stories in this one. The first story is a revenge on irresponsible neighbors. The second story will be about a landlord losing his business over a $300 deposit. And we'll finish off with a nice and short story about a workplace food thief, because nobody likes a thief. I hope you guys stay for the stories today, and please hit that subscribe button for future videos. Years ago, I used to work with a receptionist in a vet clinic named Margot. Margot was, and still is, a very sweet 65-year-old woman who had been at this practice since it opened 40 years ago. She always had a smile, a joke, compliments, and baked goods for your birthday. She never had an unkind word to say about anyone. She was seriously one of the coolest people I've ever worked with, and she basically knew everyone, from our regular clients to our mailman's granddaughter. The only bad thing about Margot, and this was not her fault, was that she and her family lived next to one of the trashiest, nastiest families I've ever met that had 2 even nastier pit bulls. I'm talking dogs that have never been trained, who have been neglected by the owners and left to run wild. These dogs were constantly escaping and terrorizing the neighborhood, even trying to get into Margot's house. Margot had asked them more than once to please keep the dogs contained in their yard and to make sure they don't escape. Margot had an elderly fat cat named Smokestack, and these pit bulls were known to attack smaller animals before. Smokestack was a nice passive cat who loved everybody who gave him attention. The family basically told her to rot in hell when she requested they better train their dogs. They claimed they knew what they were doing, how the dogs would never ever harm any other creatures, and how dare she accuse the breed, yada yada yada, basically blowing her off. Margot knew there had been reports filed against her neighbors, but nothing had ever been done about it really, so she made sure to keep Smokestack in the house most of the time to keep him safe, and was very careful not to let him out. If you'd been paying attention up until this point, you'll notice that I'm using the words was and had regarding Smokestack. The cat is no longer alive, and it was as awful as you think, and exactly what Margot had feared would happen. 3 weeks before Christmas, Margot had the day off, and was in the garage with Smokestack, fiddling with some Christmas decorations. Unbeknownst to her, the pits next door got out and ran into the garage. They went right for Smokestack. I'll save the details, but it was really gruesome. Margot screamed for help, and it was only when her son and husband came out with a baseball bat that they were able to free Smokestack from the jaws of the dogs. I was working this day, and I'll never forget when she came in. She was crying harder than I've ever seen anyone cry in my life, clutching poor, dying Smokestack in her arms. Her husband had to hold her while we tried to bring Smokestack back, but we couldn't do it. It would have taken a miracle of God, and then some, to bring the mangled cat back, and then he passed away. A truly crap way to go in what should have been the golden years of his cat life. Margot sat there for a while with his mangled body, quietly crying for a while before she finally kissed whatever part of him was still intact and stood up. She told us all, "I've got a job to do. Take care of him, girls," and then she left. We figured Margot would take a few days off to be with the family and then continue on with life as normal, and we figured wrong. Now when I say that Margot knew everyone, I mean everyone. Right after she left the hospital, Margot went to the police with some pictures of poor Smokestack and told her story. They were the same police officers who she's known for over 20 years. She used to babysit those rowdy middle schoolers who grew up to become officers today. They were absolutely shocked to hear what happened to their surrogate grandmother, and pushed her case to the front of the line. The case found itself before a judge whose daughter had gone to school with Margot's daughter. The judge granted an emergency dangerous animal extraction warrant to her neighbors. Of course, there was a hearing, within 2 weeks, which was ridiculously fast. The neighbors tried to argue that their dogs were not aggressive. They even went as far as to accuse Margot of having it out for their family and making the whole entire story up. But their argument trickled when the dozens of dangerous animal reports were presented, and finally dried up when Margot presented the surveillance video of her property, showing the dogs coming onto her property and attacking poor Smokestack. The emergency extraction and humane destruction of her neighbor's dogs was granted. It was Christmas Eve when Margot heard a knock on her door. She opened it up to see the neighbors standing there, sobbing uncontrollably. They were begging her to stop animal control. They cried to her, telling her that they had these dogs since they were puppies, how the kids would be devastated, and how it would ruin everyone's Christmas. They begged Margot and asked if she could find it in her heart to forgive the dogs and give them another chance. Up until this moment, the neighbors had behaved abominably. They never apologized for their dogs attacking Smokestack, they never offered condolences, and never apologized for trying to slander her name in court. And they didn't even pay for Smokestack to be cremated. At no point had they even shown the slightest shred of remorse for what damage their dogs had done. As the neighbors stood there, blubbering and whimpering about how this was going to ruin their Christmas, Margot looked them straight in the eye and told them, in her calmest voice, "You took away my family, so now I'm taking yours," and shut the door in their face just as animal control pulled up onto the driveway. Margot was not surprised as she watched the dogs get hauled into a truck and taken away. After all, it was her idea for animal control to take the dogs on Christmas Eve, a perk from having known the animal control supervisor for years. Margot even made sure the dogs were euthanized before the outside Christmas lights were turned on that night. The family never received the remains, nor did they ever get a chance to bring another animal into the family, as the father proceeded to drive drunk into a telephone pole that same night, dying instantly. Mom went off the deep end, so CPS picked up the kids by February, and ultimately, the house foreclosed in September. Despite how traumatic Smokestack's death was, I'd like to think that if the neighbors had shown at least some regret, Margot definitely would not have gone as far as she did. She was, and still is, the person to forgive and forget. Or maybe, she ultimately knew what had to be done to push it to the point of no return before another family lost a member to these irresponsible neighbors. Either way, thanks Margot, for making the world a little bit safer for the pets in the world. And rest in peace, Smokestack. Hopefully, I'll see you on the other side with your favorite orange sock and a can of tuna. Guys, I know this story will have so many opinions, so I'm leaving it to you guys, the listeners. Do you think what Margot did was over the line, or do you think she was in the right when it comes to a family member for a family member? Leave your comments below and make sure to vote in the poll right here. This next story is titled, Slumlord Lost His Business Over a $300 Security Deposit. I rented a house from a man who owned a painting business. The power was off when we came to see the property, but he assured us everything worked, and he even put it in the contract. The place was dirty and poorly maintained, so we negotiated the security deposit down to $300. It turned out the heat and air conditioning didn't work, along with the refrigerator and the dishwasher. I asked him to have someone look at them, and he cursed me up and down, and he called, leaving threatening voicemails. On top of this, he would show up unannounced and let himself in. On one of his visits, I showed him that the crawl space was flooded and was a breeding ground for thousands, if not millions of cockroaches and mosquitoes that would come up through the floor vents. There was absolutely no ductwork, even though he claimed that the heat and air conditioning worked fine. He accused me of causing the flood myself, even though I showed him the source was a pipe that had rusted through. He refused to address any problems and said, "If you don't like it, then you can move. You can't pay for a bargain and expect to live like you're living in the Ritz." This man was a terrible man in general. I'll give you an example. One time, he hired someone off Craigslist to cut down a tree in the rental property's yard. The man worked literally all day for the agreed $150. He spent hours cutting up and hauling off the tree. He came back that evening, just standing in the yard, and I asked if I could help him. He said he was waiting for the owner to meet him so he could get paid. The owner kept replying, saying he was on the way, but he never showed up, and the guy never got paid. Another time, our neighbor told us that he had punched the previous renter in the face and refused to pay him for a day's work for his company, and he'd bragged about renting to illegal immigrants and not having to do anything because they wouldn't sue. We had a newborn baby, so we called his bluff and decided to find a new place to live. We left the home in a much better shape than we found it, and he said he would mail us the security deposit, but never did. He dodged my phone calls, until one day, he called to say, "You aren't getting it back. You broke the contract when you left early, so go screw yourself." I was really upset because we were new parents and had very little money. That $300 was a big deal to us, and a drop in the bucket for this man. He owned an upscale painting business and had 15 rental properties. The next week, I was online leaving negative reviews for his business when I clicked a link and noticed that his website's domain had just lapsed and is now expired and available for purchase. Here comes my revenge. I knew exactly what I had to do. I immediately bought it, and then created a homepage with contact info for his biggest competitor, and he flipped out when he saw his competitor's info. I asked him if he wanted to buy the website for $320, which is the cost of the security deposit plus the price I paid for the domain. He was irate. He started calling my work, threatening to sue my employer, and he left a bunch of threatening voicemails for me, saying he was gonna beat me up, and he knows where I live, and he has my social security number. I suggested that he buy the website domain back in order to not miss out on any jobs. He told me he was taking me to court, and I told him that I had recorded his threatening voice calls and saved all of his text messages and voicemails, and he said he was gonna sue me for illegally recording him, and I replied, I look forward to seeing you in court, where I countersue and press charges for harassing me. After a while, he realized that he wasn't getting anywhere, and he called saying that he hasn't gotten a job in months. I suggested that he focus more on creating a website to find business. He lost it and cussed me out again. 6 months passed, and he still hasn't bought the website from me. I get a call from him, begging me to do the right thing and give him the website domain back. I told him the current price was $350. He said no. 6 months later, I get another phone call, and I told him the current price is $380. Eventually, he texted me to say, I went out of business, I hope you're happy. He told me what a terrible person I am, and said, karma's a bitch. And I responded, maybe if you stopped trying to rip people off, your karma wouldn't be so bad. And that was the last time I ever heard from him. The major business listing sites confirmed that his business did indeed close. I renewed the domain for another 2 years, just in case he was bluffing. A few months later, I drove by his office to see if it was still there. It was empty with a for rent sign posted. I never got that $300 back, and spent money on buying his domain, but it was totally worth it. Guys, I got a story. I had a crappy landlord a few years back, and when we left, our landlord wouldn't return the security deposit because he said there were scratches on the floor from a chair. When we tried to argue that the scratches were like very minimal, he came back with a quote that said it would cost him $3,000 to repair the damages to the floor. And he asked my roommates if we would rather surrender the $1,500 deposit or pay an extra $1,500 for him to fix the floor. I mean, in hindsight, I'm pretty sure he totally scammed us because we were young kids, but he was threatening with lawsuits and stuff, and we didn't know any better and basically lost $1,500 to him. So yeah, some landlords suck. This last story's titled, My Revenge Story Almost Killed a Man. About 3 years ago, I was working in a pretty big factory. They hired through 5 different temp services, so the place was pretty much like a revolving door. People came and left without warning, and sometimes it was just hard to find a familiar face. So when someone started stealing my lunches, everyone became a suspect. After falling victim to the lunchbox bandit for a week straight, and I'm talking about 6 12-hour days with no lunch, the frustration spawned several evil plans. In the end, I felt the Carolina Reaper would give me the fastest and most effective results. All I know was people were gonna think twice before stealing lunches. I spent all night making the best steak fajitas for lunch the next day. I finally minced the Reaper peppers into a nice pico de gallo and topped my devil fajitas off. I carefully placed my fajitas into a Tupperware bowl, garnished them with cilantro and limes, and covered them with a clear lid to display their beauty. The next morning, about an hour after I placed them in the fridge, a woman started screaming for help. I ran to the lunchroom to find the lunchbox bandit laying on the floor, gasping for air. The Reaper peppers had triggered a severe asthma attack, and he had to be rushed to the hospital. He never said anything, and neither did I, until now. Reaper peppers are not to be messed with. I'd hate to have been the guy laying on the floor because I ate someone's food that I shouldn't have been eating. But then again, I wouldn't eat other people's food because it's not mine. Guys, and that wraps up another episode of r/ProRevenge. If you're unsubscribed, hit that subscribe button because the next 100 subscribers will get a baby duck sent to their house. I'm kidding. I'll see you guys in the next one.